From the moment the little girl stepped into the old motorcycle garage, something in the air shifted like the world itself had paused to listen. The scent of oil and metal hung heavy. The tools on the wall stood in silent rows, and the dusty sunlight falling through the window made her tiny figure look even more fragile. She wasn't supposed to be there. Children never wandered into that place. And the man she walked toward, the tattooed biker with the steel gray beard and the eyes that had seen too much, was the last person anyone expected to become part of her life. But in that strange stillness, as she approached him, clutching her trembling hands to her chest, fate prepared to turn a page no one in that small town ever imagined would be written. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and the power of second chances, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe right now. Your support helps stories like this reach the world. The biker's name was Mason, a man known for riding alone, keeping to himself, and carrying the weight of a past he never spoke about. The town didn't trust him. The whispers were always the same rumors of the life he'd lived on the road, the gangs he'd escaped, the fights he'd survived. People gave him looks that said danger, trouble, stay away. But what they didn't know was that behind his intimidating presence, behind the tattoos and the scars that mapped his history, there lived a man who had once dreamed of a quiet life, of family, of peace. But those dreams had been buried under years of regret and loneliness. The girl who walked into his garage that morning looked no older than 7. Her clothes were old and slightly mismatched, her knees scuffed, her small arms marked by faint bruises hidden beneath sleeves too long for her. Her eyes were red, not from dust, but from tears she had tried to swallow before arriving. And when Mason finally noticed her standing at the edge of his work table, he froze. The wrench in his hand slipped from his grip and hit the floor with a sharp metallic clang that echoed through the empty room. She didn't flinch. She just stared at him, stared as if he were the only person left in the world she could speak to. What surprised Mason most was not her presence, but the pain radiating from her trembling body. It was the pain of someone carrying a truth too heavy for someone so small. Unsure of what to do, Mason crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her. He waited. He didn't ask questions. He simply let his silence be an open door she could walk through when she felt safe. And then, after a long, shuddering breath, she stepped closer. She leaned in, and she whispered something into his ear that made Mason's entire world collapse like a wall hit by a wrecking ball. It wasn't just words. It was confession. It was fear. It was a truth she had been forced to hide, a truth no child should ever have to speak. Mason's hand rose instinctively to his forehead, disbelief etched across his face as he stared at her tiny tear-streaked cheeks. His heart lung shielded by emotional armor felt as if someone had struck it directly. He didn't show anger. He didn't show panic. He simply took a deep breath and looked at her with a kind of gentleness that only surfaces in a man who has lost everything before and refuses to let another innocent soul break. Mason didn't know much about children, but he knew what fear looked like. He had felt it himself once in another lifetime. And as the girl sat on the table, curling her arms around her knees, trying not to cry but failing miserably, Mason knew that whatever truth she had whispered, it wasn't something he could ignore. Her name was Claire, and Claire had whispered the truth about what was happening in the place she called home. In that moment, Mason felt something inside him shift, something powerful and raw. He had spent years running from the world, but watching Claire try to hold herself together woke something within him that had slept for decades: responsibility, purpose, and the aching need to protect someone who desperately needed it. He offered her food. She refused. He offered her water. She barely nodded, but when he gently placed a clean rag beside her to wipe her tears, she finally let herself breathe again. Mason didn't touch her. He didn't force anything. He simply gave her space to exist safely, perhaps for the first time in a very long time. As the minutes passed, Claire opened up in fragments. Her father had left years ago. Her mother was gone most nights. The man currently in their house, the man the town believed was her caretaker, was nothing of the sort. Claire spoke of yelling, of smashed plates, of nights spent hiding under the bed, of moments when she tried to be brave but couldn't, and she whispered about the moment that finally pushed her to run. Mason listened without interruption, every muscle in his body tightening until he could barely breathe. He knew he should call someone, the police, the authorities, anyone. But he also knew the town authorities knew how slowly they moved, how often they dismissed quiet cries for help. And Claire's broken voice echoed something he himself had once lived through, something he had sworn he'd never let happen again if he could stop it. For the first time in years, Mason buttoned his old leather vest, the one with the patches that meant loyalty, protection, family. He walked to the corner of the garage where his rusty but powerful motorcycle stood. The chrome reflected the determined fire now burning in his eyes. Then he did something no one expected. He called his old brothers, the ones the town feared, the ones who had once ridden beside him through storms and danger. But these men weren't the monsters the rumors painted them to be. They were men who had adopted orphaned kids, saved strangers on highways, fed the hungry, and defended the helpless. They were tough, yes, intimidating, definitely, but cruel, never. Within an hour, the roaring thunder of motorcycles rolled through the quiet streets of the town. Windows rattled, people peeked from behind curtains, mothers pulled their children inside. Shopkeepers stepped outside in confusion. It looked like an invasion, but the only house they stopped in front of was Claire's. The man inside came storming out, furious, shouting threats he didn't have the power to back up. But when Mason stepped forward, flanked by the silent, stone-faced brothers who had seen more danger than that man could imagine, something changed instantly. The rage on the man's face faltered, his bravado crumbled, his body shook. Mason didn't lay a hand on him. No one did. They didn't have to. The truth Claire whispered carried its own power. The police arrived moments later, not because Claire had been heard earlier, but because the sight of dozens of leather-wearing bikers outside a house made the town panic. But when the officers learned who the bikers were protecting and what the little girl had endured, the tone shifted. They didn't scold the bikers. They didn't disperse them. Instead, they really listened for the first time. Claire's life changed that day, but so did Mason's. In the weeks that followed, the town witnessed something they never thought they'd see. Mason, the quiet biker who avoided everyone, began fixing broken bicycles for children who couldn't afford repairs. He showed up at community events not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. People slowly stopped crossing the street to avoid him. They nodded, they smiled, some even thanked him. Claire was placed in a safe temporary home, and Mason visited her often. He became her anchor, the person she looked up to, trusted, and confided in. And through her healing, he began healing too, finally letting go of the guilt and pain he had carried for decades. The town had judged him for his appearance, his past, his silence. But the day Claire whispered the truth to him, she revealed something else, something no one had ever known. Mason wasn't meant to be feared, he was meant to be found, and he was meant to save her. The last scene the town would never forget took place 6 months later. Claire, dressed in clean clothes, and a bright smile that reached her eyes, stood beside Mason at the town's parade. She held his hand with total trust. The people who once whispered behind his back now waved to him with respect and gratitude. And when Claire looked up at him with a grateful smile, Mason finally realized something he never thought possible. He had become someone's hero, someone's family, someone's safe place. And in return, she had become his second chance at life. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support means more than you know. Before we end, tell us in the comments what part of the story moved you the most and why. Thank you for watching.